The worst helicopter crashes ever. And I'm not gonna lie, in my opinion, helicopters should be banned. But guess what? My opinion don't run the world. So let's watch this video though.
Oliver Tree. On June 14th, 2026,
This was insane.
2 helicopters were
So
flying
recent as
separate
well.
routes over the Recreio dos Bandeirantes neighborhood in the southwest of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. One was a Bell 206B Jet Ranger 3, carrying pilot Alexandra Souza and 4 passengers. A 32-year-old American singer, Oliver Tree, Argentine director Lucas Vinhal, Argentine YouTuber Gaspar Prim, known online as Gaspy, and Brazilian music producer Lucas Froda. The other was a privately owned Eurocopter, AS-35OB2, flying solo with only its pilot, Charles Marcilac, on board. The 2 aircraft had departed from different locations. The Bell came from Angra dos Reis. The Eurocopter had taken off from Jacarepaguá. Both had filed flight plans and departed in compliance with regulations. Neither crew knew the other was there. At 8:59 a.m., they met in the air above the grounds of an abandoned...
Wait. So you're telling me this is a problem from the ground staff? Am I the first person to think this? But in my opinion, this feels a little bit sketchy though, doesn't it? Like, surely the ground staff is not that stupid. They are used to having flights and like helicopters. I don't know, it just seems odd though.
Church. The collision was direct. Both aircraft came apart and fell onto the parking lot of a car dealership below, where a row of electric vehicles was parked. The impact ignited a fire that spread across the lot. Firefighters responded within minutes and extinguished the blaze. 5 bodies were recovered from inside one helicopter. A 6th was found near the second aircraft. There were no survivors. Oliver Tree had been in the middle of a major world tour spanning dozens of countries and 7 continents. He had performed in Sao Paulo on June 6th. His next scheduled concert was in Lisbon, Portugal on July 1st, but he never made it. Brazil's Aeronautical Accident Investigation Body, CINAPA, opened a formal inquiry into the cause of the collision.
Yeah, the fact
An
that it's
investigation
Brazil
was
as well.
ongoing at the time of writing.
I'm not gonna lie, the case, as they said, is ongoing, but I'd love to see what happens after the case. Obviously, I cannot talk about the case.
Kobe Bryant. On the morning of January 26, 2020, Kobe Bryant boarded a private
was
Sikorsky
insane, bro.
S-76B helicopter at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. He was headed to Thousand Oaks for a youth basketball tournament at his Mamba Sports Academy. The drive would have taken...
I'm not gonna lie, I don't understand. Why did he not drive? Of course, he's gonna talk about the drive in the video now, as I can see the map. Where you could drive, you should drive. The only reason why people should take helicopters, in my opinion, as I said, the army, and if you really need it, go to a place where you cannot drive to. This is not even that much. It's like a 2-hour drive.
2 hours through Los Angeles traffic. By helicopter, it was 30 minutes. On board with
Just
him
to save an
were
hour
his
and 30,
13-year-old
bro.
daughter, Gianna, baseball coach John Altobelli, his wife, Carrie, and their 14-year-old daughter, Alyssa. Also on board were Sarah Chester and her 13-year-old daughter, Peyton, basketball coach Christina Mauser, and pilot Ara Zobayan. 9 people total. The helicopter took off just after 9 a.m. and flew northwest through Southern California under heavy fog. Zobayan was flying under visual flight rules, which required him to be able to see where he was going at all times. But the fog that morning was thick over the Santa Monica Mountains. Regulations required a minimum of 1,000 feet of ceiling and 3 miles of visibility. There was neither. Zobayan contacted air traffic control and asked for permission to fly low to avoid the clouds. He circled over Glendale for 12 minutes waiting for clearance. At 9:44 a.m., he began the final leg of the route. He told controllers he was climbing above the cloud layer, but the instruments told a different story. The helicopter initially climbed, but moments later it was banking left and beginning to descend. Zobayan was experiencing spatial disorientation,
control.
a condition where a pilot loses the ability to tell up from down or left from right. Without...
Oh yeah, I've never thought of this. You could do this. Like, you don't know if you're going up or down. I've never thought that this could happen. I always thought, like, it's pretty easy to fly things, isn't it? But in a clear day, it is.
Visual reference to the ground. He believed he was rising. Instead, he was falling. The helicopter struck a hillside in Calabasas at 9:45 a.m. at roughly 180 miles per hour. The main wreckage came to rest 127 feet from the point of first impact. The helicopter caught fire. All 9 people on board died from blunt force trauma on impact. The National Transportation Safety Board later ruled that the probable cause was Zobayan's decision to continue flying into clouds he was not certified to navigate, combined with self-induced pressure to complete the flight for his high-profile client. He had an autopilot available. He never engaged it. Extortion?
Whoa! Again, I want to see some researches and data about this. And also, isn't it like the same with private jets as well? That's why commercial jets, it's a really low chance of them crashing. But guess what? There's nothing to do late game, so rich people buy private jets.
17. A few minutes past 2 a.m. on August 6, 2011, at a forward operating base in Afghanistan's Logar province, two U.S. Army CH-47D Chinook helicopters lifted into the darkness. Their call signs were Extortion 16 and Extortion 17. They were running with no exterior lights, navigating by the faint green glow of night vision goggles. Their destination was roughly 20 miles west, in the Tangi Valley, Wardak province. The mission had started hours earlier. A platoon of 47 Army Rangers had deployed by ground to capture or kill a senior Taliban leader named Kari Tahir, who American intelligence believed was hiding in the valley. The Rangers had secured the compound and detained several fighters, but Tahir had escaped into the surrounding terrain. He was still out there. The Rangers had called for a quick reaction force to cut off his movement. Extortion 17 was the response. On board the Chinook were 30 American Special Operations personnel, 7 Afghan commandos, 1 Afghan interpreter, and a U.S. military dog. The Taliban were prepared to engage incoming aircraft.
Okay.
A group of fighters had positioned themselves on the upper floor of a 2-story building, 722 feet south of the designated landing zone. As Extortion 17 descended toward the valley floor in the black of night, they fired. The first rocket-propelled grenade missed. The second did not. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the helicopter's rear rotor system, causing catastrophic damage and immediate loss of control. The rear pylon was ripped from the fuselage. The helicopter fell from the sky and hit the ground at full rotor speed. All 38 people on board and the dogs were killed instantly. It was the single deadliest day for the United States military in the entire Afghanistan war. And the worst day in the history of Navy SEAL Team 6.
Bro, please tell me you got the guy later though. But the thing about this is like, unfortunately, the army still have to use helicopters. That's why I said earlier in the video, like, and this is really unfortunate. Unless there's new technology, they have to use it because otherwise they wouldn't be able to catch people like this. The army is crazy, by the way. The people that join the army, in my opinion, are like the most selfless people that I could ever think of. You're doing all of this, not for yourself, but for the country. That's insane.
The Konkala crash. On August 19th, 2002, at the Russian military base of Konkala, just outside Grozny in Chechnya, an overloaded Mi-26 transport helicopter lifted off from Mozdok and began its approach toward the base. On board were 5 crew members and 142 soldiers and officers belonging to various Russian military units. The helicopter was designed to carry a maximum of 80 troops. The Second Chechen War had been grinding on for 3 years. Russian forces had suffered heavily on the ground, where Chechen fighters had proven expert at planting roadside bombs along supply routes. Soldiers increasingly refused to travel by road. The Mi-26 had become the primary way to move troops in and out of the region, and it was routinely packed well beyond its capacity. Reports later described passengers sitting on top of crates of ammunition, packed into every inch of available space. At noon, as the helicopter descended toward Konkala, Chechen separatist fighters watching from the surrounding area fired a 9K-38 Igla, a Russian-made, shoulder-fired heat-seeking surface-to-air missile. The missile struck one of the engines. The Mi-26, carrying nearly twice its rated load, went into an immediate uncontrolled descent and crash-landed inside the base perimeter, coming to rest in a minefield that formed part of the base's outer defenses. The helicopter burst into flames on impact. Fuel flooded the interior. The doors jammed and could not be opened. Only 5 crew members and 15 passengers managed to escape through a small emergency exit before the fire overwhelmed the aircraft. Soldiers who tried to flee across the surrounding ground triggered landmines. Some of the survivors who made it out of the helicopter were killed by the explosions. Of the 147 people on board, 127 died. It remains the deadliest helicopter disaster in the history of aviation. 3 Russian officers were later convicted of violating flight safety regulations by knowingly allowing the aircraft to carry more than twice its permitted number of passengers.
The thing is, even if you didn't have more people than it's allowed, that could still happen. But yeah, you would have saved about half the people.
President Ebrahim Raisi. On the morning of May 19th, 2024,
isn't that the Iran president?
Ebrahim Raisi boarded a Bell 212 helicopter in East Azerbaijan province, northwestern Iran. He had just finished a ceremony with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev to inaugurate a dam on the border between the two countries.
Wait. My question is, wasn't this done by the US though? I guess I don't know. I guess we see.
He was heading home. His convoy consisted of 3 helicopters flying together through the mountains. On board with Raisi were Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian, the Governor General of East Azerbaijan, the representative of Supreme Leader Khamenei in the province, the President's security chief, and 3 crew members. 8 people in total. The flight began normally. The weather was clear at takeoff, around 1 p.m. local time. The 3 helicopters climbed through the mountain terrain in formation. For the first 45 minutes, there was nothing unusual. Then, as the convoy approached a copper mine near the village of Uzi, a cloud mass appeared ahead. The pilot of Raisi's helicopter flying in the middle of the formation, ordered all 3 aircraft to gain altitude to clear the cloud. The 2 other helicopters climbed above it. Racy's helicopter went into the cloud. Within 30 seconds, it disappeared. The pilot of the second helicopter turned back to look for the missing aircraft. He circled several times. He could not descend into the cloud, and he could not reach the presidential helicopter by radio. Then he landed at the nearby Sungun copper mine and raised the alarm. Rescue teams were deployed immediately, but conditions made it nearly impossible to operate. Dense fog rolled across the mountains. Temperatures dropped sharply
because of
overnight.
fog.
The terrain was rugged and largely inaccessible by vehicle. Search teams worked through the night with thermal drones and on foot. One of those on board, Ayatollah Muhammad Ali al-Hashim, answered a single phone call meant for the pilot after the crash. He said they had gone down in a valley and described not feeling well among trees. Then contact was lost again.
Wait, how was he alive and had signal? Brother, I sit in my bedroom and I don't have signal sometimes. But how does his brother have signal in the middle of Iran? Guess he's a president and I'm a fucking average guy.
It was found the following morning. It had struck the mountainside and caught fire. There were no survivors. All 8 people on board were confirmed dead. An investigation by the Iranian armed forces concluded the helicopter had struck the terrain on its designated flight path, but they found no evidence of attack or sabotage. Collision in darkness.
So why do they say that was done by the US and then the whole thing about Dubai and then the whole thing with petrol prices? You know what? At some point I'll watch that video.
Evening of February 4th, 1997, 2 Israeli Air Force Yasenis.
Wait, what is
on
this?
The evening of no evidence of attack or sabotage. Collision in darkness. On the evening of February 4th, 1997, 2 Israeli Air Force Yasser 2000 CH-53 transport helicopters were preparing to ferry soldiers into Israel's security zone in southern Lebanon. The previous day's flight had been canceled due to bad weather. When the fog cleared on the 4th, the mission was approved to go ahead. The 2 helicopters flew from their base at Tel Nof to Rosh Pina in northern Israel, where the troops were loaded aboard. One helicopter, tail number 357, carried 33 soldiers and a crew of 4. The other, tail number 903, carried 32 soldiers and a crew of 4. The soldiers were young combat infantry troops, most of them in their late teens and early 20s, going for a routine rotation to 2 separate outposts deep in Lebanon, one heading for Beaufort Castle, the other for a post known as the Pumpkin. At 6:48 p.m., both helicopters took off from Rosh Pina within seconds of each other. They were supposed to be heading to separate landing zones, but they were flying the same corridor in the dark. At 6:56 p.m., both helicopters reported crossing the border into Lebanon. About 2 minutes later, air traffic control lost radar contact with both aircraft. Attempts to reach them by radio failed. The main rotor of helicopter 357 struck the tail of helicopter 903. The impact was catastrophic and instantaneous. Both aircraft came apart and fell from 600 feet into
this is the problem with
the Upper Galilee.
Helicopters,
both helicopters burned on impact. All 73 soldiers and crew members aboard both helicopters were killed. It was the worst disaster in the history of the IDF. In the aftermath, many Israelis questioned why their soldiers were still stationed in southern Lebanon, viewing the occupation as a costly and increasingly unjustified mission. A protest movement called the Four Mothers formed, demanding Israel withdraw from southern Lebanon. 3 years later, in 2000, Israel did.
Okay. But to be fair, this is the problem with helicopters. It's like literally sitting on top of a horse that's on fucking cold.
General Bipin Rawat. On December 8, 2021,
I think I know this
Bipin
one.
Rawat, India's 63-year-old chief of defense staff and the country's highest-ranking military officer, boarded an Indian Air Force Mi-17 V5 helicopter at Sulur Air Force Station in Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. With him were his wife, Madhulika Rawat, his defense advisor, Brigadier Lakhbinder Singh Litter, Staff Officer Lieutenant Colonel Harjinder Singh, Wing Commander S.S. Pradeep, and 9 other armed forces personnel, including the 4-member flight crew, making 14 people in total. They were flying to the Defense Services Staff College in Wellington, where Rawat was scheduled to address faculty and students. The distance was roughly 50 miles. The helicopter took off at approximately 11:50
This is the thing, you could just drive in these distances.
The flight proceeded without incident for most of the journey. As it descended toward Wellington, the aircraft entered cloud cover over the forested hill terrain near Kunur. The pilot lost visual reference to the ground. According to the Indian Air Force's investigation, the helicopter entered a sudden change in weather conditions that caused the pilot to become spatially disoriented. He could no longer reliably interpret what the instruments were telling him about the aircraft's attitude and position. The helicopter struck a hillside in a forested area near Kunur at approximately 12:20 p.m., just 6.2 miles from its destination. The aircraft caught fire on impact. Soldiers and local residents who reached the site found the wreckage burning in dense jungle. Emergency teams had to carry bodies up steep slopes by hand. 13 of the 14 people on board were confirmed dead. The sole survivor, Group Captain Varun Singh, was pulled from the wreckage alive and taken to a military hospital in
I'm pretty
Wellington.
sure he didn't survive.
He suffered severe burns. After a week of treatment, he died of his injuries.
Yep.
The Indian Air Force ruled out mechanical failure, sabotage, and negligence. The cause was determined to be pilot spatial disorientation in adverse weather. A parliamentary defense committee confirmed the finding 3 years later. Rawat was posthumously awarded India's second highest civilian honor, the Padma Vibhushan. The kindergarten crash.
I know of that one,
On the
yeah.
morning of January 18th, 2023, a Eurocopter EC-225LP Super Puma
Kindergarten
lifted off in
crash.
Ukraine, carrying the top leadership of the country's Ministry of Internal Affairs. On board were Interior Minister Denis Monastyrsky, his deputy Yevhen Yenin, State Secretary Yuri Lubkovich, 4 ministry staff, and 3 crew members, 10 people in total. They were flying to visit frontline regions in Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk. Ukraine was in the middle of its war with Russia. 3 days earlier, a Russian missile had struck a residential building in the city of Dnipro, killing 45 people. The Interior Ministry leadership was en route to oversee the national response. The helicopter took off in fog. The crew had filed no meteorological data for the route. The aircraft was an emergency response helicopter, not cleared for the kind of flight it was being used for that morning. It flew northeast toward the Kyiv suburb of Brovary, about 12.4 miles from the capital. Around 8 a.m., children and staff were already inside, going about their morning routine. At approximately 8:50 a.m., witnesses in Brovary saw the helicopter descending rapidly. One local resident later said it fell so fast he thought it was a missile. The Super Puma came down directly onto the grounds of a kindergarten in the residential district. The helicopter hit the side of the school building and exploded. Debris was hurled into a nearby apartment block. Fire broke out across the crash site. All 10 people on board were killed instantly. On the ground, 4 more people died, including a child. 25 others were injured. 11 of them were children. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky ordered a full investigation. Prosecutors
Also, by the way, out of context, where is that brother nowadays? He's not in Ukraine anymore, is he?
later charged 5 officials from the state emergency service with violating helicopter flight safety rules. The crew had taken off without weather data and without clearance for passenger transport flights. The investigation concluded no enemy action was involved. Monastyrsky was the most senior Ukrainian official to die in the war with Russia. Disaster of 54. On the evening of May 10, 1977, an Israeli Air Force Sikorsky CH-53 Yasser helicopter was conducting a military training exercise in the Jordan Valley, north of Jericho, in the occupied West Bank. On board were 44 soldiers, most of them paratroopers, and a flight crew of 10, 54 people in total. The exercise was a night flight over the Jordan Valley. The terrain below was a wadi, a dry riverbed, carved into the valley floor in the darkness. The helicopter was flying at low altitude, as required by the training parameters. There were no lights below to give the crew a reliable sense of how close to the ground they were. The pilot flew the helicopter into the terrain. The aircraft struck a hillside and exploded on impact. All 54 people on board were killed. Investigators determined the cause to be controlled flight into terrain. The pilot had flown a functioning, undamaged aircraft directly into the ground while traveling at low altitude in the dark, with no visual reference to the hillside ahead. There had been no warning, no mechanical failure, and no hostile action. The crash became known in Israel as Asan Hanun Daled, the disaster of the 54.
See, this is what I mean. Like, the problem with helicopters here, that's how stupid helicopters are. We was talking that we would have flying cars in 2026, by the way. We don't even have properly flying helicopters.